Imagine being told you're not good enough, being denied backup and left to fail, only to become the one who rewrites the mission and history itself. This is the story of a woman who wasn't supposed to fly that day, but when command refused her request for Apache support, she did the impossible. She flew through enemy airspace alone and took out 3 of the most dangerous enemy generals. Before we start, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because stories like this will blow your mind and you won't want to miss the next one. Captain Samantha Sam Hayes was a name whispered among the ranks of the 160th SOAR, the elite Night Stalkers. She was a top-tier pilot, the kind who could thread a needle at 200 knots in a blackout. But that day, when intelligence revealed the location of 3 enemy generals orchestrating chaos across the region, Sam knew this was her shot to end a war. She walked into the command tent with purpose, boots crunching over sand as generals, and colonels glanced up at her. "Sir, I need Apache support for this run. It's deep in enemy airspace, AAA batteries everywhere. Without air cover, it's suicide." Her voice was steady, but her gut churned. Colonel Briggs, a hard man with silver hair and an ego larger than the tarmac, didn't even look up from his map. "Request denied, Captain. You'll stick to recon. That's an order." Sam's jaw tightened. Recon? They had the location of 3 high-value targets who'd been orchestrating ambushes, killing U.S. soldiers, and fueling insurgency for months. She couldn't just take pictures and walk away. "Sir, with respect, this is the chance we've been waiting for. If we don't hit now—" Briggs slammed his fist down. "I said no, Captain. You are not authorized for an offensive strike. Get your team ready for recon, and bring me those images." Sam saluted stiffly, turned, and walked out, her heart pounding like a war drum. Outside, her crew waited. Tech Sergeant Diaz, the systems wizard, and Chief Warrant Officer Blake, her co-pilot and longtime friend. "Well?" Blake asked, though the storm in her eyes told him everything. "They said no," Sam muttered. "Recon only." Blake shook his head. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" She smirked. "Hell yes. If they won't send Apaches, we'll be our own damn Apaches." And just like that, a mission the brass wanted as recon became something far deadlier. The MH-60 DAP Direct Action Penetrator roared to life under the black desert sky, its blades slicing through the humid night air as Captain Sam Hayes gripped the cyclic with white-knuckled determination, knowing this wasn't just another mission. It was a suicide run, a gamble against death itself. And as the engine screamed and the ground fell away beneath them, the weight of defying command pressed heavy on her shoulders but only fueled her resolve. Beside her, Blake strapped in tight, his voice dry with grim humor. "You know we're dead if this goes south." To which Sam shot back with a sharp grin. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." And in the back, Diaz armed up the bird, his hands moving like lightning over the console as he rattled off their loadout. Miniguns hot, Hellfires primed, rockets ready, because if they failed, no one would ever know, and if they succeeded, history wouldn't forget. The Blackhawk skimmed the dunes like a phantom, hugging the earth to avoid radar until the first storm of tracers ripped across the night sky like molten rain, ripping into the darkness with murderous intent, and Sam rolled hard left, metal, shrieking as they dodged death by inches, returning fire with a deafening roar as the miniguns spat steel fury into enemy nests, exploding in plumes of dust and fire. And just when the chaos felt survivable, the low, guttural roar of engines cut through the night, and 2 Mi-24 Hind gunships descended like iron predators, their rocket pods glinting under the blood-red moon as one unleashed a salvo of missiles that screamed toward them like flaming demons, forcing Sam to yank the bird into a gut-wrenching dive. Flares bursting like dying stars as one missile veered off, but another scorched past their tail so close she swore she smelled the burn. And then rage, pure and molten, surged in her veins as she banked behind a ridge, dragging the helicopter. So low it scraped the earth, popping up like a viper with fangs bared, unleashing a hellfire that streaked into the night and slammed into the first hind, tearing it apart in an inferno that lit the desert like daylight. But the second hind swung in, relentless, and Sam dove so hard gravity clawed at her insides, then pulled up at the last breath, the enemy overshooting into her kill zone where the second hellfire met it in a catastrophic bloom of fire. And for a moment, the night was silent, except for Sam's ragged breath and the dying echoes of destruction, until Diaz's voice cracked through like a grim prophecy. Half our ammo gone, most of our flares burned, and every radar for 100. Miles just woke up, to which Sam, staring at the compound now glowing like a nest of hornets on the horizon, simply smirked under her visor and growled, "Good. Let them know I'm coming." Enemy compound rose like a fortress of shadows, its walls lined with guns and floodlights sweeping the darkness like hungry eyes, but Sam didn't hesitate. She drove the Black Hawk in low and fast, rotors screaming, rocket pods spitting. Hell as firestorms erupted across the perimeter, tearing through guard towers and scattering enemy troops like leaves in a hurricane. While inside the cockpit, alarms wailed and warning lights pulsed like angry red eyes, but Sam ignored them, her focus razor-sharp as she flared hard and slammed the skids into the dirt, tilting the bird sideways so her miniguns could shred the oncoming wave of fighters pouring from the barracks, and as the ground team leapt into the chaos, Blake's voice crackled through the comms, urgent and breathless. "We've got eyes on the targets. All 3 generals inside the main building." And Sam's heart hammered because this was it. The reason she'd broken every rule in the book. But before she could savor the moment, the night exploded as an RPG slammed into a fuel truck near the compound, the blast rolling through the desert like a tidal wave of fire, flipping vehicles and shredding men into shadows. And then the second rocket hit closer, ripping into the Black Hawk's tail boom, jerking the bird sideways so violently her teeth slammed together, alarms screaming, engine fail, hydraulics critical, and for a split second, Sam felt death breathing down her neck, but she clawed at the controls, fighting the dying machine like a beast in its death throes. Muscles straining as sparks showered the cockpit, and in the chaos, she caught sight of Blake and his team dragging 2 cuffed generals through the smoke, while the third tried to flee with a briefcase clutched to his chest, until Blake tackled him like a linebacker, slamming him into the dirt as bullets zipped past and men screamed. But there was no time to celebrate because from the horizon came the guttural roar of engines, and out of the dust storm surged a convoy of technicals, dozens of trucks bristling with machine guns, racing straight toward them like a steel stampede. And as Sam felt the Black Hawk groan its last breath beneath her, a single thought burned like fire in her mind. This was no longer a mission. It was war, and she was going to finish it or die trying. The Black Hawk was breaking apart beneath her, its tail boom shredded, hydraulics screaming in agony, smoke pouring from vents like the breath of a dying dragon, as Sam fought the controls with every ounce of strength in her body, her gloves slick with sweat and blood, alarms wailing, like a chorus of doom in her ears, while behind her the cargo bay was a chaos of men and steel. Blake and his team hurling the cuffed generals to the deck as bullets tore through the fuselage like a swarm of angry hornets. Diaz shouting warnings over the comms drowned by the thunder of miniguns spitting molten fire into the night, and all around them the desert burned, lit by tracer arcs and exploding shells as the convoy of technicals charged out of the horizon like a steel stampede, dust boiling under their wheels. Mounted guns blazing, RPG gunners clinging to the rails like grim reapers hungry for blood. Sam didn't think, didn't hesitate, because hesitation was death. She shoved the throttle forward and turned her crippled bird into a screaming harbinger of vengeance, ripping through the sky in a bone-shaking dive straight toward the enemy, miniguns roaring in a hellish crescendo that chewed through flesh and metal alike as rocket pods unleashed streaking serpents of fire, tearing trucks into burning carcasses, the desert erupting in blossoms of flame so bright they painted the clouds crimson. But the enemy kept coming, relentless, and with each maneuver the Black Hawk groaned, panels tearing loose, hydraulic fluid, hissing like venom, until Sam knew this machine had only moments left to live, and so did she, unless she ended this now. "Diaz!" she bellowed over the din, voice raw. "Give me the last hellfire!" And even as sparks showered the cockpit, and glass spider-webbed under a hail of rounds, Diaz's hands flew over the console, arming the missile with trembling urgency. "You're insane!" he shouted. But his voice cracked because deep down he knew they were already dead if this didn't work. And then came the lock tone, high and pure like a death knell, and Sam's lips peeled back in a savage grin as she growled, "Say goodbye," and thumbed the trigger, sending the last hellfire screaming like a dragon's breath into the lead technical, the explosion ripping it apart in a cataclysmic firestorm that flipped the second and third trucks end over end, scattering the rest like rats. But in the same heartbeat, the Black Hawk screamed its own death cry as an RPG streaked from the ridge, a streak of white fire carving through the dawn to slam into their side with an earth-shattering detonation that ripped half the fuselage away, hurling men and metal into the void as the bird spun into a fiery spiral toward the sand. Sam's world became a hurricane of smoke, sparks, and fire as gravity clawed her down, muscles tearing as she fought the mangled controls like a demon refusing hell, and with a roar that ripped her throat raw, she wrestled the dying machine into a brutal skidding crash across a dry riverbed, sparks geysering in a screaming torrent until the bird slammed to a smoking halt on its shattered skids. Silence falling for one breathless instant before the world erupted again with gunfire as enemy survivors surged through the smoke like shadows of death, their silhouettes backlit by the flames of their dead, and Sam, bleeding, broken, half-conscious, ripped her helmet off, staggered to her feet with her M4 clutched in bloody hands and fire in her eyes, ready to make her last stand in a circle of death. But then the horizon roared like Judgment Day as two Apaches came screaming in low, their hellfires streaking into the enemy ranks in thunderous blossoms of annihilation, while Black Hawk stormed down for extraction, and Sam collapsed to her, knees in the dust, heart hammering like a war drum, as rotor wash whipped her hair and smoke curled around her like a cloak. And when she opened her eyes again hours later, she was lying on a medevac stretcher under a blood-red dawn, the sky echoing with distant explosions, and standing over her was Colonel Briggs, jaw tight, eyes like steel as he glared down at the woman who had broken every order and still dragged victory from the jaws of hell. "You disobeyed everything I said, Captain," he growled, voice low, but his gaze burned with something else, respect, maybe awe, and Sam, her lips cracked and bleeding, gave him a feral grin that spoke of fire and defiance as she rasped, "No, sir, I did what you wouldn't." And Briggs stared at her for a long, taut moment before the corner of his mouth twitched in the ghost of a smile as he muttered, "Hell of a job, Hayes. Don't ever do it again." To which Sam, her eyes blazing like the dawn over a land soaked in blood and victory, whispered with a ragged laugh, "No promises." And as the dust of war settled and the last echoes of battle faded into the silence of the desert, one truth etched itself deep into her soul. Rules may win wars on paper, but it's defiance that carves legends into history, and she had just carved hers in fire.